Good morning, everybody. So we have started recording. This is a recording of a Chapter 3 lecture at Rankin. And okay, so Chapter 3, sorry, just paused the recording there, but we're back. Chapter 3, how to use HTML to structure a web page. And the key word there is structure. When we learned about HTML, we learned that HTML is used for content and structure. And so when I think of structure, you think of your structure of your home. You think about where the rooms are. You think about where the walls are, where the structure is, where the posts are. And so of a web page, you think of the structure. Where's the header? Where's the footer? Where's the sidebar? That's the structure of the web page. And then I also say, HTML is for content, and the content is your images and your paragraphs and your headings. And so we're going to dive into a lot of that in Chapter 3. We're still learning the fundamentals of HTML. And so really, when you think about what's the importance of this chapter, this is just your fundamentals of HTML. And if you're going to work on a website, if you're going to, whether it's a simple static website or anything more modern than that, then you're going to want to know and need to know the basics of HTML. And so if we look at these knowledge objectives, we're going to review some things here. Title tag, meta tag, head, so basically the kept calling it the cheeseburger, but brought to my attention that this is like a skeleton of a HTML document. You could better describe it as this, or describe it differently as a skeleton, HTML skeleton. Then we're going to talk about what is a block element versus an inline element. And so when we're talking about HTML tags or HTML elements, some of them are considered block and some are considered inline. So we'll cover the differences there. Again, we'll cover some block elements, the heading tags, the paragraph, and the div. And then some inline elements, we'll cover those. There's something called character entities that we'll review and learn what is NBSP. You got this ampersand NBSP. There's basically special characters there that do something. Oh my gosh, all these objectives. IDs, classes, and title attributes. What are they used for? Again, div and span elements. What are they used for? Objective 8 is a big one, and because these are the newer elements in HTML5, we'll spend some time on on this objective, covering the header tag, the main tag, footer, section, article, nav, aside, and figure. And so that's a really important one here. All of these are important, but definitely want to hit on number 8. We'll get into links a little bit more, how to code links, because last week I had you code some links, but we didn't really cover them in too much detail. They were just introduced. We're going to dive deeper in our links. And then we're going to work with anchor tags or with our links and our images. We might get into image links. I think that's what number 10 is images that act as links. And so I think that's what number 10 is referring to. We'll get into some accessibility guidelines. If we think back to Chapter 1, we learned about accessibility and what that means, how people with disabilities, be it audio, visual, cognitive disabilities, they should all be able to use our websites. And so how can we better code our sites for people with disabilities so that they are accessible? And again, lists. And so what you're going to find out a little bit is last week I kind of got you ahead of the curve. And that might have been cruel of me to ask you to do things before we lectured over them. But here we are this week, and you'll be in a better position this week because you had to do some of this stuff last week. The first topic isn't even on the objectives, which is interesting. But if you've ever opened up a website and you see this little icon up in the tab, that's called a Fave icon. And the Fave icon, if you add a website to your favorites, obviously you click the little star over here, and then you go to your favorites bar, you see a bunch of Fave icons. In fact, throw over my Google Chrome. If I click on ranking, you can see all these little icons over here on the left. And these are your Fave icons. And these just help you identify the website. And the website that I recommend for creating a Fave icon is Favicon.io. And you can see, you can turn an image into an icon. You can turn text into an icon or an emoji. So let's just do this. So let's go through this process. And you can see here that the text is the letter F, and they kind of preview this for you. So I'll just say rankin, and not a whole lot of room for rankin. So maybe we'll just use the rankin R. So the one thing about Fave icons that you'll notice really quick is that there's not a whole lot of space on them. They're very small images, 8 pixels by 8 pixels, 16 by 16 pixels, very, very small. You can change your font. Whatever you want. You can change your font size, background color. And this is how you generate, this is one way to generate a Fave icon. There's a bunch of different generators out there. So it says, first we use the download button to download the files below. Place the files in the root directory of your website. So I'm just going to open up Visual Studio. And the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to open up the Chapter 3. We'll just put it in Chapter 3 homework. Okay. Now let's go ahead. It says place the files in the root directory of your website. This is probably where people mess up the most, is they put it in the wrong folder. So let's go ahead and download this into my homework, Chapter 3. Now this is the zipped file. We're going to have to unzip this. So if I save it, and extract, so you could see you definitely have to extract. Again, people tend to mess this step up, is they download a zipped folder but they don't unzip it. So that's what extracting does for us. Okay, and you can see that we've got a PNG here. It's called Fave Icon -16 by 16.pmg, Fave Icon 32 by 32 PNG. And so now it says, next, copy the following link tags and place them into the head of your website. So we've got them copied. Now, you guys are gonna be mad at me, because I think there's definitely something to learning how to code this, but there is a shortcut. Maybe you knew this, maybe you didn't. We talked about this last week. This is what I referred to as the cheeseburger, or this week I started calling it the HTML skeleton. The skeleton probably better describes it than a cheeseburger, but I like the cheeseburger because you got the buns, you got the toppings, and you got the meat, and then I called it the sesame seeds. Anyways, certainly a faster way. Visual Studio is smart, and it has something built into it called Emmet, E-M-M-E-T-T, or maybe one T. and it helps us write code very fast. And so the first step is you'll notice we have to have an HTML file. Step one is make sure that your file is a .html. This is index.html. If you don't have an HTML file, this doesn't work. And I type an exclamation point. So the first thing that I'm going to type is an exclamation point. And you can see that's an Emmet 1T abbreviation. And now I'm going to hit the tab key. So you can't see this, but I'm going to hit tab. And it fills in our skeleton for us, even a little bit better because it includes all the important attributes that I left off, right? The language, the char set, the title. It wants you to put in a title. There's this other meta tag that we haven't covered that's actually pretty good for responsive web design. And so you need that meta tag in there as well when it comes to later on in this course. So, yay, that works. So a little bit faster way to get our HTML skeleton. Whoops. Accidentally minimized you guys. There we go. Okay, now it said to copy and paste this into... so I copied that code. Now, this doesn't look like it's going to work to me, and let me show you why. Let me go ahead and format the document. Remember that uses Beautify to kind of clean this up a little bit. Right now, our Fave Icons are in this Fave Icon Io folder. And so I did not copy this folder into the root. If I open this with Live Server, I think it's going to break. I don't think it's going to work. Yeah, you can see my Fave Icon is not there. So let me instead go into the unzipped folder. I can do a couple things here. I can type in the folder name Favicon Io, and this is for smaller Apple devices. Let me make sure I got that path right. Favicon Io / and you can see then it picks up that I'm coding it in the right directory now. Let me see which one this one. This was the 32 by 32 .png. So we're going to do that. Favicon Io 32 by 32. This is the Apple Touch icon. So Favicon Io / oh, not the zip. And this is so I'm just replacing the path on the href attribute to be inside of that folder. Favicon Io / this is the 16 by 16. And site.web, let me make sure that's even in there. Okay, there is a folder, there's a file called site. Now you can see I got my Fave icon working. So in my custom document, that's the step for creating your own Fave icon. Again, you could do that from several different sources, be it from a picture, from a text, or an emoji. Again, the thing to keep in mind is that they're pretty small icons. So you really can't take like some family group photo on the beach with 100 people on it and turn that photo into a Fave icon, because it's just not going to fit. So that's how you code that, and that's the first slide on our PowerPoint. The next tag is the meta description. And the meta description, we have not talked about this tag. Remember, up in the head, we've talked about the char set last week, but we have not talked about the meta description. There's also a meta keywords. Let me show what the meta description is. If I search for Rankin Technical College, you see in this little paragraph in Google, this is the meta description. This is the paragraph. This is the paragraph that is the sales point of your marketing department. Basically, this is what you want people to read when they're trying to decide if they need to go to this link on your site. So that's what the meta description is. And in fact, if I go to your homepage, that paragraph of text right here, looking for the best tech schools, that's not on the homepage. That is simply in a meta tag that's in the title. And if I inspect this page, I can drill down into, let me go up, let me kind of collapse this. This is really small to see. But if I expand the head in the HTML, so I'm inspecting the HTML, you see the meta description. I can click on it right there. Right there it says looking for the best tech schools. Okay, so again, this is a marketing paragraph that is used to sell your site essentially on Google for search engines. More so than just Google, but for search engines. Okay, so that's the meta description. It is used by Google very heavily. Okay, there's another meta tag. Okay, so this is used for search engine optimization. There's another meta tag.
Went wrong. Try again in a few seconds.
I'm going to unplug my Google. It's listening to me. My Google Smart Speaker. Yeah, so I don't know what the meta tag for emails. Evan said, if meta tags exist for emails. I'm not sure that they do. I'm not sure, Evan, if you want to expand on that, because I'm not sure how they would be used in an email format. But maybe I'm just not thinking about it. There's also the meta keywords. Okay, and so I will tell you that Google uses the meta description. Google used to use the meta keywords. And the idea behind the keywords is that these are the keywords that if a user pops it into Google, that your page is optimized for those keywords. Some number of years ago, Google actually stopped using meta keywords. So Google actually stopped using this in their algorithm for ranking pages. Because what happened was people started spoofing their websites, and so they would see, for example, and I'll just pick on a celebrity topic that of course, we'll just say Kim Kardashian because she's popular and let's just safe to say that people are searching for Kardashians in Google a lot because they're just popular and. All right, I'm unplugging my smart speaker.
Is that right?
Okay, I'm back. So people would, let's say their website was about World War II, but then to get people to their website, they would put in the meta keywords. They would put Kardashian, Kylie, and whatever, Kim, or whoever they are, right? So they would spoof Google by putting in keywords that were not accurate to what their website was actually about. And so because of that, this whole trend called Google Bomb became a thing. And what Google bombing was spoofing the search engine. So when you would search for miserable failure, you'd get results like, biography of George Bush, right? And so there was a bunch of ways to fake out Google to get them to rank the pages maliciously, I guess you would say. Okay, so keywords not as important as the meta description. And again, the meta tag, the name attribute is description. The content attribute is just a paragraph. So a couple things here. The meta description is important for SEO, search engine optimization, but so is the title tag. A lot of beginning developers, a lot of beginning coders want to take their title tag and name it something like this, like homepage. That's a really bad title tag. Because Google is going to look at your title tag to try and understand what your page is all about. And so, what is this website topic? Rankin Technical College, a technical college in St. Something that people might be searching for. And so maybe Rankin has a decent. Now keep in mind, so you could see the title on Rankin is Rankin Technical College, the leading Missouri technical college. And so what we're trying to do is we're trying to put in keywords that people might be searching for. If someone searches technical college, St. Louis, Missouri, then I would say that we've done a pretty good job of optimizing our homepage for those keywords. And so again, the title tag is really important to search engines. And so always include a title in the head section. You probably saw if you tried to validate your page without a title, it wouldn't even validate. So you have to have a title tag, and it should be descriptive, right? It should accurately describe the page content. You should focus on a couple of keywords that you want people to search for. And so there's a whole process called keyword research where you're researching what are the commonly searched for keywords, and then you're going to try and optimize your homepage around those keywords. It should be an interesting enough title to get users to click on it. The title should be unique for each page in your website. That's another mistake that I see, is that if I add a new document here, obviously my homepage is going to have a different title than our contact page. And so, again, using Rankin as the example, if I go to the Contact Us page, it's descriptive. It's a Contact Us Rankin Technical College. So if you go to Google and you say contact hopefully those keywords is going to bring us up to that page, right? So it's very descriptive. It should bring you straight there. You don't necessarily want to have a paragraph in your title tag. Their suggestion is about 65 characters or less, because search engines will kind of cut you off after that point. Same thing for the meta tags. The meta tags should be descriptive. They should summarize the web page itself, so each page should have a different meta description. It should encourage users to click on the link. Again, the keywords, the recommendation there is 10 keywords, but again, search engines don't really pay too much attention to those keywords. It's not heavily ranked in the algorithm on Google. And so those are some search engine guidelines for the title tag, search engine optimization guidelines for the meta. Okay, then they cover on slide 8 here just some basic tags, and I'll demonstrate this in our contact page. So we have a contact, Rankin Technical College. We would say meta you would say a way to contact the various departments at Rankin. Something to that extent. Remember, meta tags they do not have an end tag. Okay. Probably have seen this. These are what are called the heading tags, H1 through H6, all the way down to H6, which is so let's take a look at what these do. Pretty simply, they make text bold, and the first thing you're going to see is that they change the font size. And so this comes from newspapers, right? So if you think about newspaper headings, like the big heading is the H1. These are your attention getters, right? So you're putting important attention-getting information in headings. These heading tags also play a role in search engine optimization. So the more important text you want to put in the bigger headings. So the H1, the more important text you should put in the H1s. Less important than that would go H2, so down and so forth. Typically, the way they're going to recommend it is at the top of the page, you think of a newspaper, you start with the biggest attention getting, up at the top and then they get smaller as you go down the page. So a general recommendation is that you start with the biggest one and it goes smaller down the page. So important text goes in headings. Search engines are going to optimize around that. So if there's keywords in headings that people are searching for, if what they're searching for matches what's in your heading, there's more than likely a good match there. It also makes it bold, and so you'll notice this is all of these texts are bold. And so not only does it change the font size, but it also changes that the font is also bold. So those are the heading tags. There's also, what does this slide cover? Oh, a paragraph tag. And a paragraph tag is exactly for a paragraph. So you take an English paragraph, several sentences go in a paragraph tag. This is another sentences. This is another. I guess I'm spelling sentence wrong. I don't know. Here's a third. Okay, and so that's exactly what the paragraph tag is used for. How embarrassing if I spelled that wrong. CES. CES. Goodness. Okay. Anyways, that's your paragraph tag, and what's worth pointing out here is that every one of these is on their own line. The headings all are on their own line. The paragraph is on its own line. And if I inspect this, you can actually see that above and below the paragraph, it puts a line break. Above and below the heading, it puts a line break. Yeah, I know. It's Monday. I can't spell sentence. I'm embarrassed. Live and learn. SENTENCE, of course. Point being, there. Point being, what is life if you can't laugh at yourself? These are considered block level elements. Block level elements put line breaks above and below the element. And you can see here their spaces overlap. In other words, the bottom of this heading, that's actually called margin. What's in that that tan area? That's margin on the bottom. The margin on the bottom of that heading overlaps the margin on the top of this paragraph. Okay, so that might not be important today, but as we go through this class and we start moving things around on the page, that becomes important. Okay, and so again, elements that cause line breaks are considered block level elements, which means they have spacing on top of them and beneath them. They have a line break above and beneath. And so they give several examples of H1s, H2s, and H3s. Again, heading tags, don't get the heading tag confused with the head tag. All too often, keep in mind the head, these are our extras. You do not put heading tags. You do not put heading tags in the head tag. All right? The head tag is simply what I refer to as the extras on a page. Okay, and you can see that none of this is content, none of this is structure. All the content and structure is going in the body. So all of our heading tags go in the body. And to throw you even for a loop, here's another header tag. Okay, and this is kind of coming up later. You might put a heading tag in a header. See how that cleans that up nice? It's a beautiful thing. But the header simply means, this header tag is simply a tag that says this is the stuff that goes up at the top of the page. That's all that means. Okay, now you could put the H1 at the top of the page. You might want it somewhere else. You might not want it at the top of the page. You might just want an image in here. Okay, and I don't have any image to put in there for right now, but again, the head tag are the extras. It's part of the skeleton of a HTML document. The header simply says go up at the top, and the H1 is a heading tag, and the heading tag is important for getting people's attention and for search engines. And if we go back to search engines, some heading tag, you use H1s for the most important information. Generally speaking, only code, this is just recommendations. This is not like a hard requirement, but only code a single H1 on each page. I think of a newspaper, and a typical newspaper, just they got that big heading at the front with a big picture that's going to grab your attention. And then after that, you got smaller headings for each story. Each story has its own smaller heading. And then again, generally you start big and then you get smaller. Okay, a couple questions here. Yes, so one question is, do you put the href in the head? Now let's keep in mind that href is an attribute. And so you do put href in the head in a couple of places, specifically here, that belong to the link tag. These three link tags were for our Fave icon. So yes, there are scenarios where you have the href attribute in the head, but there's also scenarios where you have the href attribute in a link. And if you want to go from the home page to the contact page, so the href attribute belongs to several different tags. Notice right now I'm on the index page. Notice right now I'm on the contact page. And so the href attribute goes in a couple of different places. Another question is, what's the difference again between the header and an H1? Okay, the header tag is a structural tag. And a structural tag simply says this is where you put the content for that goes up at the top of the page. So the header tag, and we're going to cover this a little bit in more detail with some other tags, because there's more. There's a footer tag, there's an aside tag, there's a main tag. But these are structural tags that basically say, inside of a header tag goes the content at the top of the page. And so generally speaking, the idea is that the content's going to go up to the top. Okay, Evan, did I answer your question about... Oh no, I guess you were kind of talking to Ja. Okay, so Ja was asking about the href attribute, and I talked about the two places where you can put the href attribute. Cool. This is good. I like the questions. Good. Now, one thing that you'll see is that the headings do change the font size. However, there's a trick, because H1's our biggest heading, but what if I want our H1 bigger than that? What if I want the H1 bigger than that? So if HTML is for structure and it's for content, CSS is for style. Well, wait a minute. We just changed a style. We made text bigger, and we did that with an H1 tag. So the H1 tag is kind of an old tag that's been kept around. H1 tag has been around since the beginning of HTML, probably. Okay? And in the old days, we used to have tags more frequently that did both content and style. Okay? And so we get a little bit of style with our H1 here. But generally speaking, we want to keep the style for our CSS. And so if we want to change something, oh, by the way, this is kind of just an important side note. See this little dot here? That means my HTML page has not been saved. Okay, you want to save often. Okay, so the hotkey for that is Control S. I'm going to hit Control S. You'll notice now that dot goes away. All right, so little side note, little indicator there that your document isn't saved. So we know that H1 is pretty big. I can write some CSS up here in the head, and don't worry about this yet, because I know we haven't covered this, but in too much detail. We can increase the font size. Let's see. Let me try 2M instead. So the color is working. I was trying to show you how we can use CSS, which is what I'm writing here, to okay, there we go. I know I get it one way or another. To increase the font size. And so if we want to, we can increase font size, we can decrease font size. Ooh, 115, pretty big. 11 pixels, pretty small. So we can still use CSS to increase and decrease our font size of our headings, even though they have a kind of a default font size. Okay, and generally speaking, that's the recommendation. If we want bigger heading, use CSS to do that. Don't worry too much if you don't get the right font size using your headings. What you want to do is you want to put the important headings in an H1, less important in an H2, so on and so forth. That's more important than worrying about the font size, because you can change a font size using CSS. Now, there are several other block level elements. Again, keep in mind when I say block level elements, that's what this is saying here on slide 11. Block elements cause line breaks. And so let's just take this little bit of code and see what the pre-tag does. Some block elements are way more common than others. Let's just take this and paste it into our document. And let's format. Now there's a hotkey for formatting, Shift-Alt-F. Shift-Alt-F. Okay, that's a hotkey for formatting. And go back to the page. Okay, so what this pre does, you guys can probably hear my baby crying upstairs. That's the nature of the beast. You might notice this pre is a block level element. So over here you can see it's display block. You can also see the font family is monospace. And so it looks like it's typed at a typewriter. And so a lot of times you take like code chunks and you put them in a pre-tag because it changes the font to this looks like a chunk of code now, versus if I inspect this paragraph is not, it's just kind of the default font of the browser. It's not monospace. You can also see that the pre-tag indents, and so we've got some spacing to the left here. Actually, what we have here is padding, right? So when I'm using this inspect tool, above and below, you see that orange, that's margin. You could see the 13 pixels of margin, but then you can also see, in the blue, that's actually not padding because padding is green. That's just where the content space takes up, but it does indent it. So that's what the pre-tag does. That's not super common. You don't see that a ton. A block quote indents on the left and the right. And so, again, it's a block level element, not super common. But what it does is it indents on the left of the screen. And if the paragraph was really long, you would see it would indent on the right. So there'd be some space on the left and the right. And then there's an address tag that's also a block level element. Let's take a look at the address tag. Obviously, what you do is you put an address in an address tag very clearly. Now, it could be an email address. They also include a phone number here. And these are just for more than computers in the sense of desktops and laptops. But a lot of times, like a smartphone will be able to take an address tag, and maybe it will automatically populate an email address in your email app. And so other devices like smartphones and tablets can take this tag and use it in certain ways. Maybe it'll open up your good catch, guys. Thank you. The syllabus was up, not the code. So these tags, like the address tag, again, they're used by smart devices to be used in other apps. And so maybe it takes this phone number and you can click on the phone number and have it open up in your phone app, right? And so that's how these could be used by other devices. So that's the benefit of having an address tag. And let's take a look at that in the browser. And so in this address tag, you can see it's italic, right? Font style is italic. And so that's essentially what the styling does for an address tag. Okay, so learning some of these different tags, some of them more popular, more common than others. Now, the opposite of block level elements would be inline elements. Block level elements, the big thing to remember there is that they cause line breaks, and they cause content to go down on the page. Inline elements then do not. And so if you're looking at a way to emphasize text, EM, maybe I want to emphasize EM. And so it just makes that word go into italics. Now, in the old days, there used to be an even easier tag. There would be I. Well, the I tag would also make for an italic word. And so you might be wondering, well, what's the difference between EM, emphasize, and the I tag for italics? Again, I's been around longer. EM came around the year 2000 that this became popular. And the difference between the two is we talk about accessibility. And remember, accessibility is how to code your site for people with all sorts of varying disabilities. And so the EM tag is actually better for accessibility purposes in that a screen reader, modern screen readers are taught to speak the word differently when it's emphasized. And so you just got to have a normal voice, and it'll in the person's voice, in the screen reader's voice, it'll emphasize the word differently. With a more modern emphasize tag than the, I would guess, more old school traditional italics tag. And so EM is better for accessibility purposes than the I tag. There's also a strong tag, and it's the same concept. That the strong tag is better for screen readers than there's an older B tag for bold. So both of these visually do the same thing. They make the word or the couple of words bold, but strong is better for screen readers than the B tag. Okay.
Can you describe why the EM tag is better than the I tag one more time?
Yeah, the short answer is, why is the EM tag better than the I tag? The short answer is for accessibility. Screen readers, let's just pick the strong versus the bold. A screen reader person who's blind is having a software kind of read the content to them so they can understand the page. And so you can imagine a screen reader kind of reading a paragraph, and they come across a strong tag. Well, they can actually, bolden their voice. The screen reader can make their voice sound differently, so that you can still kind of get the same effect as you would visually. Does that kind of make sense? Does that answer the question?
Yeah, I appreciate it.
Sure, yeah. Yeah, inline elements do not cause line breaks. And so when I go back to the strong tag is an inline element, that you'll see that there's no line break every time I put a strong tag. However, a paragraph was a block level element, which is the opposite of inline. And every paragraph I have puts a new line break. So here's another paragraph. And when I go back to the screen, you can see there is a line break between those two. So block level elements cause line breaks. Inline elements do not cause line breaks. Does that make sense, Aaron? take a look back at our slide. So these are all inline, emphasized, strong. Sub puts the two beneath, so it kind of like lowers the line height. And there's also a sup, S-U-P, that increases it. So we'll take a look at what that looks like. Keyboard data, KBD. Keyboard data, again, it changes the font, and it just meant to be like a typewriter, basically. Just changes the font to a different font. So again, I don't necessarily use this very much. A lot of times, if you want to change where something is at, you can use CSS. If you want to change a font, you can use CSS. So some of these EM and strong, really common. KBD, sub and sub, not super common. And then there's a Q for quotes. If you want to put in quotations, however, a lot of people just type those. And that works. Browsers are smart enough that works. Okay, so plenty of slides here, but we've been going for about an hour, so I always like to take a break every so often. So I'm going to go ahead and pause the recording. We'll take a break. Okay, folks, we are back recording. We left off on slide 15, which is character entities. And what HTML character... Call them character codes, character entities. The book calls them character entities. More accurate descriptor. Oh, there's a whole bunch of them. These are symbols and characters that have to be coded a specific way. And so when you're looking at these character entities, they all have the same format. And so what is that format? That format is that, again, these are not necessarily keyboard characters, but if they are keyboard characters, for example, I could type the @ symbol, okay? But the @ symbol should be, or I could type the copyright symbol. That might be a better. Let me pick a good character. Less than, okay? The thing with the less than symbol is that when your browser sees a less than symbol, your browser thinks that must be the start of a tag. And so you notice when I type the less than symbol, it even gives me a red indicator here that says, there's a different way to code that, because the browser is going to think that there's a tag that you're opening here. And so the way to code the less than symbol, these character entities, they all start with an ampersand. So when I go back to that chart, notice all of these start with an ampersand. And when I say all of these, like the pi, ampersand pi, semicolon, they all start with an ampersand and they all end with a semicolon. So for a less than symbol, it's LT semicolon. And so that is a character entity. And so these are very specific characters that have to be coded in a certain way. And the common ones are like the less than symbol, the greater than symbol. Let me view this in the browser. You could see it put the symbol in there, even though I didn't type a less than symbol. I typed in this character entity. And so some common ones are less than, and the slide covers the common ones. Right side quote, left side quote. This is a really common one, NBSP, non-breaking space. And so since we haven't really learned CSS, you might want to put a space Like, watch what happens here. If I put in this H6, I just put in a bunch of spaces. Well, that didn't work. Yeah, so Dylan asks, what is the definition of a character entity? It is a character that has to be coded in a specific way. It's a single character that has to be coded in a specific way because your browser would misinterpret it otherwise. It could misinterpret it otherwise. Yeah, that's the and symbol. When I say ampersand, that's the and symbol. And so where I left off was, I said this is an H6. I put a bunch of manual spaces in here, but keep in mind the browser ignores white space, right? So the browser ignores white space. So here, this is an H6. It didn't push anything over. So instead of putting in all these spaces, we can use, and by the way, use this sparingly, non-breaking space, NBSP. And if I really want to force this, I could put some non-breaking spaces in there. And now you could see that I've got my space that I was looking for. Again, so that's a common one. Less than, greater than. The copyright symbol is another character entity that is common. Let me go here. Ampersand copy. So you get the copyright symbol, right? You see that in a lot of the footers of sites. So those are character entities. They're just special characters that have to be coded in a unique way because otherwise the browser might not interpret them how you want them to. And that's their output of their character entities. Yeah, no problem. Let's just review these attributes. Down here you can see always code the lang attribute on the HTML so that we know that the language for the page is English. When we use our emit exclamation point, it automatically does that for us. So that's nice. Remember last chapter we talked about classes and IDs as ways to identify elements. And so, in other words, this is a text box. That's what this input is. This is a text box. And we're just giving this text box a name of email. We're giving it an identifier of email. This paragraph, we're giving it a name of first. Now this one we give it an ID, and this one we give it a class. We did mention this. I'm gonna review it now. The difference between ID and class is minimal, but it's important. An ID should be a unique identifier. In other words, there's no other identifier on this entire web page that's going to be called email. So this is the only text box with that identifier. Nothing else, no paragraph, no links, nothing else has this ID. It's unique. The idea behind class is we're giving it a name, but it can be a shared name. And so you'll notice here, this paragraph has a class of first, but also this other paragraph down here has a class of first. This paragraph down below actually has two classes. It has the class of first and it has the class of field. So you can assign multiple values to a single attribute. And you just put you do that by spacing them out. Okay, so classes and IDs are just ways of naming your elements. You give them names. IDs should be unique. Classes can be shared, and that's really all there is to it. Then there's the title attribute, which is essentially a tooltip. You'll notice here When I hover over my email text box, you get the little tooltip, the little mouse pointer. It'll point up a little tooltip. If you hover it, and it'll say enter email here. And so a lot of applications have tooltips. You just hover the mouse over something and it gives you a little pop-up. Actually, like right here on my PowerPoint, if I hover this, you see the tooltip. It says save to this PC. That's what a tooltip is. Okay, semantic elements. Let's cover this concept. I'm gonna make a new page. We've got the contact, we got the index. Let's say about me, about.html. All right, so we got about.html. I'm gonna type in the exclamation point, hit tab, give it a little title. Okay. When it comes to versions of HTML, in the 90s, I'm just typing notes here. In the 90s, we had HTML4. In the 2000s, we had XHTML. That was the standard. And in the 2010s, all the way through today, we have HTML5. And so these are kind of like the iterations of the different versions of HTML. Around the 2000s, we started using this tag called div. And the div literally stands for a division of your page. And so it really doesn't do much by itself. You can see kind of by default, let's take a look at what a bunch of div tags do. They are block level elements because they cause line breaks. But you know, there's no font, there's no styling. It's a pretty generic tag. It doesn't do much. But what you could do is you could say this is the div with an ID of header. This is a div called content. This is a div called aside. And this is a div called footer. And just by doing that, again, it still doesn't do much. So this is kind of the way XHTML was quite a bit. XHTML used a lot of divs. And now what you would do in the next is we would start using CSS we'd use CSS to style these different divs. This div is called header, so we'd tell the header to be red background color and give it a certain height. And you could see that it would only affect the header. And so that's how it would be used. Obviously, the header goes up at the top. And then we could say, okay, the aside, this is CSS that I'm writing. We'd give it a width of 20% of the page, background color of yellow, and let's put the aside here. Not like I really need to make this page, but and then let's make the content and then we would say footer, going with my Jamaican colors here, red, green, let's go black. And you can see how you can start to have a page structure. Whoops. Let's do this. You could start to have a layout, a page layout, using these different divs, right? So the divs were used literally to divide the page: a header section, an aside section, a content section, a footer section. And this is what we did for 10 years in the 2000s, is we made all these different divs with all these different IDs, but that created some problems. Here we've got 4 divs and it's nice and clean and we style it and it's not a problem. But again, in the 2000s, developers use divs for everything. They overused divs. And so I might code a div ID of header, but there wasn't a consistency, because you might code your ID, instead of calling it header, you might call it head section, right? And so, well, is there a difference between header and head section on my page and your page? Probably not, but who knows? I might call mine content. You might call it main area. So there was a naming problem in that there was no consistency across sites. Like, what would you give your IDs and what really went in those IDs? And so it wasn't consistent across developers. Another problem was divs were used for everything. And so we got 4 divs. A typical website, I mean, without exaggeration, could have 100 div tags on it. Okay, and so they even gave it a name. They called it Div Overload, and that sites were overloaded with divs, and it created confusion because divs were overload. Question here is the div tag similar to the paragraph tag? Yes and no. Yes, because they're both block level elements and they cause line breaks, but div is more generic than paragraph. Paragraphs, you're supposed to put text inside of a paragraph. A div up in the header, I could put an image here. That's right. Yeah, if you look at some websites, you might see hundreds of div tags. Again, creating this div overload. So inside of this div tag, we could have our logo.jpeg. Okay, so inside of divs, you could put images, you could put text, you could put a bunch of different things. But the whole point of the div is this is the section of the page that goes up at the top. Okay, so yes, they're similar, but they have different purposes. Paragraphs have literally text and several sentences in them. A div is just meant to be a section of the site, a division of your structure. I'm in the basement. That's the bottom part of my house. The division of my house is the basement. And so it's more structural in nature. Should we stay away from div tags? Good question. Not completely. Div tags are not gone. But here's what happened. In HTML5, they said, you know what? Instead of making a div ID of footer, let's give them a tag called footer. So they replaced several div tags. Instead of making a head section, let's make a header. Instead of an aside section, let's make an aside. Let's make a main. So several div tags have been replaced with what are called structural elements. This is the header. And you could put paragraphs in here. You could put an H1. This is an H1 inside of the header. Now what do I do here? Instead of targeting the ID of head section, I'll just target the tag of header. Instead of targeting the ID of aside, I'll just target the aside tag. Instead of targeting content, I'll target main. And then this is footer. So basically what HTML5 did is they made semantic elements, and what I mean by semantic is that they're self-describing. Header is obviously, it's self-describing. It's what goes up at the top. The main is the main content of the page. The footer is what goes at the bottom. So they're semantic, they're self-describing. Yes, that's more accurate, Dylan. The div tags are more about structure and where the things are at on the page, and paragraphs are more of the text that's on that page. Okay, so what did I do here? I made my page more semantic. I made the tags that I used, I made those tags more, I don't know if it's self-evident or self-describing, however you want to say it, but visually, it looks no different. So to the end user, is no difference. But to the developer, it makes a difference. To the developer, you know, this is considered cleaner and more modern than having a div overloaded page. This is not as frowned upon as using too many divs. Now, divs did not go away. So you might see inside of the main, you might have a div with an ID of something. And you can still use divs. Divs are not gone. Divs are not gone. And then I could target that something, give it a font color of green. And actually that's not, green on green's not a good thing. So let's do a font color of purple. Right? So in that case, I used a div to target that text inside of the main. So I know I just covered a lot of different things. Whole point being, we have these structural tags that are used to define the structure of your site that replace the older divs. It helps the problem of div overload. That doesn't mean div overload is gone. That just means it's reduced, right? Divs are still used and you can still have div overload. Another semantic tag is the figure and fig caption. Now I will tell you that these tags, main, header, footer, there's also an aside tag that I used. Let me think of a few more tags here, because I don't think we covered them all. Actually, let's go. So we got the header, the footer. H group is not. I don't think it's considered supported nowadays. Nav, which is where your nav bar goes, your navigation links. The aside, you know, you could think of the aside as, you know, something off to the side. Obviously, think of like advertisements on the side, or you know, I just think of Facebook. You know, on the side you've got like the chat box, something that's kind of way off to the side. Time is obviously the time of day. Articles, like a blog article. Section is kind of like your generic div. Section is just a generic area of the page. So section really isn't too different than div. And those are the main ones. Header, footer, nav, aside, main. Main's important. Let's go back to the PowerPoint. I just wanted to cover it because there's a few more here that are, again, considered semantic elements. That word semantic means it's self-describing. Like the P tag, you could consider that self-describing because P, paragraph. Figure versus fig caption. A lot of times the figure is an image, but in this case they show the figure, which is a little chunk of code, and then a caption is some text that's associated with the figure. So figure and fig caption elements, again, these are semantic elements. The figure is the content, whether it's an image or whether it's text. A figure is content, and then fig caption is the title or the text that's associated with that content. And the reason that these are used, again, some being used more than other, figure and fig caption kind of ties these two things together. So if you have a small screen, like a cell phone, you know that figure and fig caption belong together. So you're not going to like separate them visually on the page. They should be kept close together, is the general idea behind figure and fig caption. Again, the caption being the text that's associated with the figure. Right? So this is kind of the older way of doing page structure with divs, and there's a span element, and the span element is an inline element that does not cause a line break. So if I go back to my page here, you might notice I put a div in the middle here. I could replace that div, because remember divs are block elements. I could replace that with a span. Oops. And I really didn't do anything here besides I changed this tag to go from a block level element to an inline element. The page is going to function the same, but the only difference is block versus inline. So you'll notice here now there's no longer a line break that's happening here around because there was a div here. So here's a general rule of thumb. Use div tags only when the HTML5 semantic elements don't apply. Okay, so if you can use a semantic element, you should. Only when there's not a semantic element should you use a div. Use span tags only when tags for identifying content don't apply. And so we've learned things like emphasize text, strong text, keyboard data, KBD. We learned all these different tags already that identifies content. If you can use one of those, then you don't use a span. So div is a generic area of the page. Span is a generic inline element that typically identifies a content inside of like a paragraph. Okay. We are at a very important part of the lecture, but this lecture has been lengthier than normal. We've got a little over 15 slides to go. Let's take another 15-minute break here, because when I come back, I really need your attention on these slides. And I realize we've been going, so I'll give you guys a chance to break for a minute before covering this topic. Okay, so let me pause the recording. Okay, we're back from a break, and where we left off is more dealing with URLs and paths. And so up at the top you could see they label an absolute URL. The idea behind an absolute URL, this is any web page that's not on your site. And so an absolute URL can, again, any web page that's not on your site, you code it pretty simply. With the HTTP, you give it the full URL. You got to include the HTTP://www.google.com. And then here is a link to Google. And so this is what the text says, and this is where the link goes. You include on an absolute URL, you include the HTTP://. HTTP is the protocol, meaning go through that port, through the port 80 on the web server, basically is the port that web traffic flows on. And then you go to the web server, www.google.com. Kind of an interesting thing, these slashes here. One of the main guys that's given credit for the development of the World Wide Web, his name is Tim Berners-Lee. I'll just type his name out here. Tim Berners-Lee. I think it's something, again, typo on his spelling of Berners. But he's still alive, and the web really became popular in the 90s, so it's not like it that long ago. And he did an Ask Me Anything, AMA, on Reddit, and he's done a couple of them, and you can check those out. And the thing that Tim Berners-Lee said, again, he's one of the guys, probably the primary person who's given credit for the development of the World Wide Web. Even though it was a team effort, there's many people that came up. And, HTTP is a protocol, and that says port 80. And www.google.com, it translates into an IP address. But the / really serves no purpose. And so Tim Berners-Lee was asked on Reddit, why the // Everything else makes sense. HTTP : and then the web address, but why the // And Tim basically said, the // really has no meaning, and if I could do it over, I would delete the // And I just found that kind of funny. It was like all these people all the time are typing HTTP : // and literally the // has no purpose. Yeah, there you go. It's a pretty neat read on Reddit. To talk to one of the founders of the web. When it comes to like famous people, you got obviously Bill Gates made Windows, Steve Jobs, and now Steve Cook. That's basically but Steve Jobs on Apple. You get these big tech people, Elon Musk, and these are all like well-known people, famous in fact for what they created, and yet this guy who no one's ever heard of, unfortunately, creates the software side of the World Wide Web. He helps to create HTTP. He helps create HTML. He's a founding father of the web, and no one knows who he is. It's kind of sad, but I digress. Back to links. That's a link to Google. You can click on it, and it should take us to Google if I get our webpage to open up and refresh. I'm going to click on it, and it takes us to google.com. Again, absolute links, not links on our site. And so then there's relative links. Relative links are they're internal links. They do not have HTTP. And so down here in the footer, this is the about page. I'll code another link to the home page, which is index.html. Again, what goes in between the opening and closing anchor tag is what the user sees. And if I open that up, down here, you can see it's in purple because I've already clicked it. But by default, it's blue. And if I click it, it takes us to the home page. And then on the home page, I linked to the contact page. And so what's important here is that all of my pages are currently in the same folder. But for organization purposes, a lot of times we have multiple folders. And so we're not always going to be linking to pages or to files that are in the same folder. In fact, I did that earlier when I had this Fave Icon folder, and then I had these images inside of the Fave Icon folder. And so let me go inside of main. Let me just code an image tag. Now in the hierarchy, in the folder hierarchy, we're in what's called the root. The root is whatever folder that we open up in Visual Studio. Okay, our web server is configured to look at that folder as the root. Okay, so the root is dynamic, but safe to say whatever folder we open up is considered the root. And if I want to code an image that was in the same folder, I would just give it the name of the image. Let me pull down, let's just save that image. They're making it hard. So normally you can just right click an image and save image as, but this is an image link, so it takes you somewhere and you just can't save the image. That's a video, so we can't save that. If I just search for Rankin Technical College, go to images and click on that image, right click, here's save image as. And again, I'm going to save this in my chapter 3 homework, so don't make the mistake and put this in your downloads or in your documents. I'm just going to call this rankin.jpg. So when something's in the same folder, we would code this as rankin.jpg. And now you see we've got the image of Rankin in there. But a lot of times, for organizational purposes, you don't put images in your root directory. A lot of times for organizational purposes, you put images in an images folder. And so here I might make a folder, new folder called images. Let me spell it right. I'm bragging about my typing speed, and then I have nice typos all over the place. So you notice I now put the Rankin inside the images folder. Well, if I do that, then my old path will break. And so go back into Visual Studio Code. I need to stop closing this. I just need to keep it open. And you'll see I get this little icon here that says it can't find the image. And so the question is, how do you go down a directory, into a subfolder? Because that's what we have now. We have a subfolder, and this is considered lower in the hierarchy. So in the PowerPoint, here is your images subfolder, right? And we now need to code into a subfolder. So how do we update that path, which is before it's just called rankin.jpg? Well, what you do is you just type in the name of the folder, images / rankin.jpg. Now that works. So we've updated the path to go down a directory. So that's the important thing. How do you go down a directory? What if I had multiple directories? And this wouldn't really make sense. But let's just say Rankin. So let's make another folder called Rankin here. So let's just say that there were so many photos, thousands of photos, that we had to classify categories of photos. And so this would be our Rankin photos. So keep in mind, our HTML page is still in the root. So now we have to go down, again, that broke the path. So now we have to go down 2 directories. So this path would be images / rankin slash rankin.jpg. And then that image works. Okay, so going down a directory structure is a very common thing that you have to do. Very common, okay? Sometimes going up a directory structure is another important thing to do. So let's do that. So now, let's see. I'm gonna get Visual Studio to recognize my new folders. Let's refresh here. Okay, so there's my images folder. Images rankin. Let's create a new file using Visual Studio. I'm going to create a new file here. This will be in the rankin folder. So let's call this a page about rankin.html. So rankin.html is now inside of this rankin folder. So now I'm a couple directories deep in my folder hierarchy. So the question becomes, how would I link to a page? Like, how would I link back to my home page that's in the root? And that's done with dot dot slash. Dot dot slash will take you up a directory. But keep in mind, the directory one up is a rankin folder. So we need to go up 2 directories, dot dot slash. So now we go up 2 directories, and that will link to your home page. So if I open that page, which is just a blank page, and I click on home, now notice I'm in the rankin folder, which is in an images folder. There's my rankin.html. But if I click that, it takes me back to the home page, index.html. So going down a directory, or multiple directories, is done by typing the name of the directories followed by a slash. I think that was right here. So you can update a path on the source of an image or the path of a link. Okay, and those are both things that you have to consider the path for where the files are at. Okay, so those are the 2 main ways of going down a directory structure and up a directory structure. Now, in the PowerPoint, yeah, probably dot dot slash is most likely going to be on the test. This right here screws up more students than it helps. Okay, this is important code. This is important code, but you have to understand it to use it. Okay, and so a lot of students use this and it works until it doesn't, and then it breaks, and then that causes problems. So root relative as determined by Visual Studio, we said the root is whatever folder that we open. So if we open up a different folder, we now have a different root. If we have a different root, then our path changes. Our root relative path changes. And so you have to know that your root is not going to change before you use root relative. Now here's the deal. The root on your computer might not be the root that I have configured on my computer. So if you use that root relative on your homework, you turn that in, and then I have a different root configured on mine, your images will break, your links will break. You know, this root relative path will cause things to break. And so I really don't recommend using that unless you know what the root is on my computer. Since you don't know what the root is on my computer for right now, my general advice is avoid this. Okay, but this basically takes you back to the root directory. And so instead of having to type dot dot slash, you could just say go back to the root. So it seems nice, but again, just keep in mind that this would be go back to the root, then go into the subdirectory of images, then find the logo. Okay, So going down a directory, going up a directory, very useful. Root relative, useful, but got to be careful. Got to be careful with that one. I don't really recommend beginners use it. Okay, stick with these. Stick with these. All right. A bunch of different link examples. Again, I gave link examples. The default link color is blue. Till you click it, it goes purple. That means it's been visited. Now, for search engines, again, search engines look at what's in a link as important, because let's say homepage link. That's okay, but maybe Rankin Technical College homepage. That might be a better descriptor for search engines than homepage. Okay, so search engines pay attention to this text. It's important. And so the more descriptive you can be here, even if you put in some keywords, that might help search engines understand what that page is all about. Again, I think I threw this at you on a lab. So a little bit here, I'm putting you guys ahead of the bookwork, because lists are essentially bullet points. So when you look at this, you've got an unordered list tag, and then nested inside of the unordered list, you have line items. So an unordered list, these are just bullets, squares, circles, etc. And so lists are important on the web because people don't like to read. And so generally speaking, I even do this in my emails. If I can condense what I'm saying down into a bullets, then people are more likely to read it, because people like short, condensed versions of information. They don't like to read long paragraphs if they can avoid it. And so lists are really good on the web for that purpose. Get the information across quickly and concise. Ordered lists are more ordered. 1, 2, 3, 4, Roman numerals, A, B, C, D. There's a type attribute that you can use to change the bullet and what the bullet looks like, or the order, whether it's a Roman numeral, letters, so on and so forth. And so this is what lists look like. Again, they're good to use where you can. A definition list. Basically for terms, I would say these lists are pretty popular, pretty commonly used. Definition list is just exactly what it sounds for, almost like note cards. Like, what is the term? So here's the DL, that's your container tag. All of these tags are nested within the container. Then you have your term, and then you have the definition data. Definition term, definition data, definition term, definition data. It's like flashcards, but not really common, so I'm not going to harp a lot of time on this. We already covered images, but you have the image tag with the source attribute, and then you give it a relative path. Okay, this means go down a directory from the file that you're coding, go down a directory from that folder location, and then find the image named logo.gif or GIF, however you prefer to pronounce that. There's a debate there on how that's pronounced. The alt attribute, if the image doesn't load for whatever reason, it'll show the alt text. The alt text, so basically if the image breaks, it'll show that. It's also used for screen readers to describe the image. And then the height says how many pixels high will that logo take up. So we get some images. We got some different types of images. Pings, Jpegs, and again, GIF or GIFs. There's a link here to kind of follow to learn about the different image types. Jpegs are probably the most commonly used on the internet. They're really good for, photos with a lot of detail. And so for photos, most commonly they're stored as JPEGs. GIFs are a lot of times these animated GIFs they're most commonly used on the web. Pings are used, I think generally they have a larger file size than JPEGs, so they look really good. JPEGs look really good, but I think pings, generally speaking, have a larger file size, so you could use them for photos as well. But just generally speaking, GIFs and GIFs or GIFs, GIFs or GIFs, however you want to pronounce it, can also be used for some simple logos, and so they can be really small file sizes. If it's simple enough, if the logo is simple enough. Again, follow that URL and kind of read up on that a little bit. You always want to include an alt attribute with descriptive content of the image for accessibility purposes. And if the image is just used to make the web page pretty, then you can code the alt with an empty value. In other words, empty quotes. Okay. And that's really just kind of the end of the lecture. These last couple slides are just demonstrations of code with the header tags and footer and nav, the nav tag, which again typically has your links in your nav tag, main content, footer content. Web pages are pretty ugly at this point because we haven't really done a ton with CSS. Okay, I'm going to show a couple more things that are on this recording that's going to help you for the homework, and then I'm going to stop this recording. So again, what I'm doing here is I'm having you code I would say about 90% of what I'm asking for we've covered in the PowerPoint, but there's some number of things that I don't cover in the PowerPoint that I asked for on the homework. And so I'm going to cover those topics now so that you're not lost. So this right here will help you for the homework. So I'm going to create a new file. Let me create it in the root. Okay, cool. I'll call this help.html. Sorry about that. Okay, let's open up the homework. So I did open the homework on Inside Ranking. It's Chapter 3 homework. This homework is due at the start of class tomorrow. You should be able to find the homework under Inside Ranking, under your coursework. Okay, so basically in your Chapter 3 homework folder, create a page called About Me. Add an external style sheet named styles.css and link to this page from your HTML. I covered this last week, but I'm going to cover it again because I did it pretty quick. So I'm going to create a new file, and it said name it styles.css. So we're going to write our CSS inside of styles. I'm going to close everything else. Close, 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 close. So all I have is an empty HTML page. Call this Chapter 3 homework. I made a new file called styles.css, and it says, and link to this page from your HTML. So you might remember this from last week, but you might not. Remember, we showed you a link tag. Styles.css. Type attribute is text CSS. Rel is style sheet. Okay, so that links our HTML and our CSS together because obviously they have to work together to get the job done. So I just wanted to show how to do that first step. Use a Fave Icon generator. I showed you how to do that. Use the following semantic elements on your page. So again, generally the header is information at the top. So whatever content you have at the top of your page, put it in the header. Whatever is like kind of like the main, what is this page all about? Put it in a main tag, put it in a side tag. It tells you what to put in each. Put a footer tag. It tells you what to put in it. Add a meta description for about you. Add the meta keywords for about you. So you got to think of like a paragraph to write about yourself to put in the meta description. You got to think about some keywords. Your name. Whatever keywords. Like if you were to Google and like search for you, what keywords would you want to be found under? You could be creative there. Number 7, I have not shown yet. Number 8 or number 9, I have not shown much of that. Let's start with number 8. Use CSS to change the background color of the page. So we're going to use, again, we covered some CSS. We're going to cover more of it next chapter, but we've covered the introductory concept. I've even done this. Body, background, color, pick a color. So change the background color of your page using CSS. We've done that. Change the text color of the page. Apply it to body. So to change the background color, we use the background color property and value. To change the text color, you use the color.
We can't see Mr. G.
Oh, thanks. Sorry about that. How long have you not been able to see?
Only for about 10 seconds at the max.
Okay, so did you get the background color of pink? You got how to do that?
Yes, we got that one.
Okay, to change the text color to green is just color:green. And all I did was I put that on the body tag, and now I'm just making a paragraph to show that when I launch this page, again, I'm helpless when it comes to art. I'm not very artistic. I'll show you how to make good-looking sites. Not to say that we're not going to make good-looking sites, but I'm not artistic, and it's okay if you're not artistic. If you are artistic, that's better for you. So text is green, background color is yellow.
The screen thing again, Mr. G.
I keep doing it. Sorry, got to get used to it. So what happens here is I need to minimize that. Okay. Sorry about that. Again. So back to the code. What have we written so far? We wrote a CSS selector of body. We changed the background color. We changed the text color. We wrote a paragraph. And we can write a heading. Basically all of our text will be green. The only thing that's a little bit more complex is number 7. And again, this is a head in the book. That's why I'm doing this on this video. This is, I think, the next chapter where we cover this. It says, use a wrapper div to apply a wrapper to your page. Let me explain what a wrapper div is. If I go to any website, in my fantasy football site, you can see how the content is all centered on the page. Like if I'm looking at this site, basically over here you got a bunch of margin. On the left you got a bunch of margin in the right. And then all the content is in the center. And if I were to inspect this page, you can see there's something here called outer wrapper. If I highlight that page, there's something called an outer wrapper. And if I dig down into this, you can see here, if I click that, if I click this div, again, Div Overload. If I click this div, you can see that it kind of puts a box around the content. So everything inside of this div is kind of centered on the page. That's where all of your content goes. So this is this idea of a wrapper, and they even called it here page wrapper, and they give it different names. It's basically how you get the content aligned in the middle. Now, that's not text align center. You notice all this content is not text align center. All this is doing is centering the content on the page. So this is not putting all the content text align center. Should we use the div wrapper, or is there another? No, it's a div ID of wrapper. That's a good question. It's a good question. So how do we do this wrapper? So to do a wrapper, there's not a special wrapper tag. That's div ID of wrapper. You open it right after the opening body. So on slide 9, oh, by the way, this will be on the hands-on test. So you need to know how to do a wrapper div for Friday. You open it right after the opening body, and then you close the div right before the closing body. So you notice this wrapper puts all of our content in the middle. So all of our content on the page is now inside of this wrapper div. But you have to also style it. To style it, we're going to target the wrapper, and let's just give it a width of 50%. So that's going to take up 50% of the page. I mean, if you're looking back on that, you might say that's 50% width, because you got all this empty space over here, all this white space on the page. Then what you do is you set the margin left auto, margin right auto. And so it just basically calculates automatically. That's what auto is for, automatic. It says, okay, well, if the wrapper is 50% width, we got 50% left over, so we're going to put 25% on the left, 25% on the right. So automatically divide the remaining space on the page. And if I look at this now, you can begin to see that we've put some margin on the left. And also, if I had enough content, you would also see that there's going to be some margin on the right. Okay? So this is the idea behind a wrapper div. You can see all this white space on the left, you can see the white space on the right, and you can see that the content is now basically in the middle. Couldn't you use the body tag to center everything in CSS? Let's look at the difference between text align center, because this is what a lot of people, let's get rid of my wrapper. Use a CSS comment there and comment that out. Let's do text align center. Do you see the difference there? Everything, when we had a wrapper, everything was still left justified. The text would still start on the left, whereas text align center literally puts it right down the middle of the page. So there's a difference between using a wrapper, which says, okay, basically even out the white space that's left over on the page, to be on the left, and even amount on the right. Now, let me undo this last chunk here. If I undo this is how the page was originally. You notice how all the white space is over here on the right? That's what a wrapper does for us. It now basically balances it out. So we got some white space on the left, some white space on the right. Now, the question becomes, couldn't we just put the ID on the body? You could put the ID on the body, and then you don't need to make another div, and then you could just put this on the body. You could, in other words, actually, we don't even need an ID. You could just do this. I think maybe Andrew, that's what you were getting at. Now we just have a body, and then we can delete the div tag. But what this allows you to do, like if I open this up, that looks the same, doesn't it? It looks just the same. And now we don't need a wrapper div. Well, here, let me undo. Let's bring it back to what I had. I can now target the wrapper div separately. So the body can have one background color. The wrapper can have a different one. And so you begin to see how you can put a background color of gray on the body and then a background color of white on the wrapper. So you can kind of treat them as different entities then. Good question. That's one ugly web page. Okay, I'm going to stop the recording and get this going on YouTube. We covered a whole lot of topics today. So certainly tonight, read the chapter, read the chapter, read the chapter. If you're trying to skate by in this class without reading the chapters, you're only causing, pain for yourself. So read the chapter, do the homework, and tomorrow I will open up the lab for chapter 3. So let me go ahead and stop the recording and get this on YouTube.